And they're off. Here we go.
I love the Epic 3.0 from Ultraspire. I had the opportunity, I've talked about it before, that I wore it on the FKT of the Tarawera Long Mile Road to the aid station on pavement. But the other day I wore it for 7 or 8 hours in the forest, fully loaded down, 35 litres, marking out Riverhead Rampage. Comfortable, light, very ergonomic, very well put together pack, running around, first real experience running with a big bag, and boy was it amazing. Check out that and other packs, like my other favourite, the Big Bronco Race Vest at ultraspire.nz. Get yourself some goodness.
Also goodness, we've been on the Currans Buzz. Get those, the little purple pills that make us feel gooder. New Zealand black currants. Head to Currans, curranz.co.nz to read up on the science behind them. And then once you've done that, get your 20% off. You can do it anyway. Get your 20% off your first order of Currans 30s with the code DIRTCHURCH.
Further Faster. Best independently owned outdoor store in the known universe, whether you're heading out climbing. I mean, the days are getting shorter, the nights are getting longer, darker, colder. Head along to furtherfaster.co.nz. Check out the amazing range of Montane and other jackets, insulation, base layers, mid layers, and their spectacular range of headlamps. All things to set you up for the long, dark nights. www.furtherfaster.co.nz, 57A Beechin Street, Sydenham, Otutahi, Christchurch. Do it.
Like Further Faster, they're in Christchurch. Rocky is hairy and so is Badger. Jules is nice and Jacob is delicious. Go to Further Faster now.
Oh, Further Faster, they're in Christchurch. Rocky is hairy and so is Badger. Jules is nice and Jacob is delicious.
Go to Further Faster now.
Dirt Church Radio.
Episode 272 of the Dirt Church Radio podcast. I'm Matt Raymond.
And I am Eugene Bingham. Tēnā koutou katoa. No mai, hoki mai. We made it.
We made it, mate.
We did. And you have made it through another River Ram.
Yes.
10 years of
Yes.
River Ram.
10 years of River Ram. I'm exhausted.
Rebecca's exhausted.
Scott Bougen's
Yeah.
exhausted. Rebecca's exhausted. Matt Fraser's exhausted.
Yeah.
There's a few exhausted marathoners out there. There's a ton of exhausted half marathoners and ton of exhausted 10K and 5K runners too.
There was a lot of people
What
showed
a
up.
trip. There was a lot of people showed up. So we had about 450, high 50s.
Wow.
A lot of on the day entries.
A lot of
across
them.
all of the.
Which, given that it was
all of the
raining,
distances.
still people showed up, didn't they?
Yeah.
Tough bunch out there.
So not in the forecast, and then woke up on the Friday morning and it was raining a little bit, and we went out and marked the course, and it was a little bit claggy, but it was okay. And then it persistently rained in the morning. We set the marathoners off in the dark and the rain, and it rained for most of the day.
Yeah.
Some people got very, very muddy.
They
but
did.
a good time was
Yeah,
had.
and that's the good thing about Riverhead, isn't it? Is when there hasn't been rain for a while, it just gets slicky, doesn't it? It's not even like it's not so much muddy; it's that slick on top of the clay.
Yep.
And people were slip sliding around and came back in wearing more of the course than they'd run.
Yes. There was one part on the 21, Scott was packing down outside the course today. I couldn't get out into the forest because I needed to be within phone reception today, unfortunately. But Scotty was in the forest and he took a photo of one part of the 21, and it was just 2 grooves in the people's butt cheeks, basically, at this point where everyone had just slid down this hill.
That was the best option.
Yeah, I believe the technical term is called glissading, but sliding down on their asses, and it was great. It's a really nerve-wracking thing putting on a race, I tell you what, and sending people off into the bush.
Yeah.
And everyone came back.
They did. And some of them came back very fast, and some of them came back very happy. Lots of them came back very happy. But it was such a good vibe, and I love Riv Ram in that it's got a different vibe to other races. It's very, there's lots of locals doing the shorter events and challenging themselves by maybe they haven't run trails before, giving it a crack. There's juniors. There was a lot of enthusiasm there.
Yeah, across the 10 years, one of the things that stood out at Riverhead is the juniors, and they turn up and they're little rippers, and they invariably, I think every year the race the 5K race has been won outright by a junior, and not just a girl and a boy have won at various times. So across that distance, the adults have never won it, and it's not for lack of trying or sandbagging. They're just little rippers, and fantastic.
And it was cool too with the marathon, how they had to do the 2 laps, and they were crossing the line at where we had people lined up to go out.
Yes.
So it was cool, wasn't it, when marathon runners would come in around about the time we were about to send off the next race, and they'd get a big reception, big cheer to send on their way. It was cool.
Yeah, and I think it was important and it's an important developmental part when you turn up to a race and you're challenging yourself, and say you're doing a 5K or a 10K, and then you see someone who's running a marathon or a half marathon, and then you work out in your head that they've run parts of the trail that you were doing, because all of the races did end up sort of finishing on the same spot, or the same trail network. So that was really cool, I think, for people to see. And amazing time.
Yeah.
And some cracking times. I mean, the half marathon course was no joke, and obviously the marathon is 2 laps for half marathon course. So results-wise, we had Alexandra Westphal taking out the win in 4:28 and Adam Clark in 3:31. And in both cases, their splits were about bang on. Adams were seconds apart, and Alexandra's were 2 minutes faster on the second lap. So she did negative split the course.
Amazing, isn't it? Oh, speaking of, just quickly on times, Sean Collins, at one point I looked at him and he didn't actually have any expressions anymore. He just had like numbers across his face. He was like a walking spreadsheet. Wow.
We need to look. There is no greater debt of thanks. That man. There was some behind the scenes.
Raru?
Not even Raru, more Taki challenge. I'd say you'd say. There's always something that happens in any race, and Sean was our timing man to the rescue. And
but it just emphasised to me that, when you're a runner and you turn up to a race and you're not having to think about all that stuff, and the things that are going on behind the scene, and what you're looking at is a duck floating on the surface. Below the water, the legs are going crazy, and you get a little bit grumpy because the results don't come out exactly when you want them to, or maybe the prize giving is running a bit late. You don't realise that there's a medical emergency that the organisers are trying to deal with, or they're trying to get the right results because you don't want to announce the wrong results at the prize giving.
Yes.
And as a runner, you don't think about all those sorts of things, but everything's being dealt with.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
And one of the cool things for us in managing the expectations, and this is a little bit of we've never had medals, and we've made it a point of pride. And initially it was like we never had medals because we wanted it to be sort of a internal thing, an internal validation that you've gone out and experienced it. But also it keeps costs down because, that nice medal, that's a cost. And you're soaking up that cost as a participant. And as well, I don't want to be all Damien Hall about this, but the carbon footprint of those medals, coming from overseas, that's expensive too. So we were fielding a little bit of that, but people are always really, really understanding and gracious about that stuff too.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, I mean, you did personally handmade someone a medal one year.
I've done
twice.
it twice.
Okay,
so
okay.
At Riverhead Rampage, we have a policy that if you persist in asking for a medal, we will make
I don't know
you
if
one.
you should be putting that out there.
No, but you will get the medal that we give you. So one year, it was a CD that I'd found in my car that I made into a medal. It was really lovely. I used glue and put stuff on it. And one year, this big Chinese dude, he just persisted and Lola crocheted him a medal and it had a duck on it.
Oh.
And he was quite happy.
bet
And
he
it just
was.
had a duck on it. It didn't have a river. It was just this little crochet.
Absolutely.
The duck. So
Yeah. Anyway, on with the results. The 21K, Emma O'Malley, 149.51 for that, which is no joke on that course. And,
No joke.
And John Wilson, 139.18 for the win there. In the 10K, I am improvising here because I put the results in, but I forgot to put the actual times and things in. So I'm just filling in details here. It took about duck and below the surface, but Emma Mackey, 48.15 with the 10K win. And our mate, Paul Lenihan, 38.19.
Paul Lenihan.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a lad.
What a lad.
First met him and his uncle at Kosciuszko, seen him out in the forest, and what a lad.
Yeah, for
what
sure.
An absolute
For sure.
lad. It was interesting with John Wilson.
Yes.
We had an Irish gentleman win the 10K, a Scottish woman win the 10K, and a Scottish gentleman win the half marathon. He accused me of buggering up his big moment because I there's heaps of people running across, and I second place and first place. And then, as I was calling him up to get his prize, his family were coming down there.
Oh, that was
so
classic.
I sat him back down, and we did it again just to make sure his wife and a child got
And
there
the
on
crowd
time.
played
So
along with it, which was cool too.
They did. It was wonderful.
And speaking of, it was the juniors who dominated, not the overseas entrants. Mackenzie Pearce, 28.31 in the 5K for women. We took out the overall, the girls, and Finn Brosnan 25.52, which I said to you before, didn't I, when they took off, there'll be like 40, 45 minutes with those conditions,
45
won't they?
minutes.
And you were like, 25. Yeah, and sure enough, 25 and 28 with the winning times. They mustn't have been touching the ground, those kids.
No. Really light on their feet and just full send. Full good.
Send, yeah. Look, while we were also on site, we caught up with Dr. Enia Raumate, who ran the half and was with Vicky on the Huntaway Run Co-Store tent. He's running 8 ultras on 8 continents this year. We've mentioned this before on the show. He's already done the first one, Southern Lakes Ultra, and he's soon off to Namibia and then Peru. So we thought, let's catch up with him and talk about running, logistics, scholarship, whether you should drink coffee that comes from questionable sources. Whakarongo mai. Enia Raumate. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Welcome.
Hey, bro.
Hey, so what do you got? You got a couple of weeks until you head off to Namibia.
Yeah, about 2.5 weeks off to Namibia, and then quick turnaround actually, come back and then have about another week and a half, 2 weeks, and then off to Peru.
Oh, man. I don't know how you... Like, that to me, the whole logistics and dealing with time zones and jet lag and stuff would blow my mind more than the actual running.
Yeah, I think they I suppose the logistics of it is the biggest thing for this first one coming up. Like, I mean, I've been sick and just got over COVID, so there's that. But then it's all the travel.
Yeah.
Like, it's just from getting to any of these races from New Zealand, it's just a real shit.
Yeah.
Really. Like, I mean, I've got to go. I've got like almost a day layover in Dubai or something, and then another 17 hours in Johannesburg, and then a small flight to bloody Walvis Bay.
Yeah.
You spend about 3 days travelling. By the time you get there, you feel like shit.
Yeah. So you're flying more than you're actually running.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. In terms of travel time, yeah. Because I suppose 250 on average, when you spread it out over all the days, comes somewhere between 30, 40 hours, depending on, the terrain and
Yeah.
stuff. So probably travelling more than I'm running.
And how was number one, apart from getting COVID on the way back?
Oh, it went really well, actually. Just took it easy to start with. A few gear changes I made afterwards, but everything held up really well, like all the kit and stuff and food. And then, I thought I'll put the hammer down on the last day, 35 k's to go, and I just couldn't push it. And I was just like, I don't know what's going on. And then got sick at the after-match function, had to go home.
Yeah.
And I knew it was COVID.
Yeah.
It's just like,
Yeah.
bugger.
You think it's gone, eh? We think it's, but it hasn't. It's still lingering around.
Yeah, it just lingers around, and then of course, you try to get back to things, you go too early and you get another hit, and it's just the way it is. But no, this will be the tough 2 races because it's a really short turnaround for Peru.
We've got Matt Raymond joining us as well. Look at this. It's like a little get together in the
You
forest.
think it's cold or something, the way he's sort of wrapped up?
He is quite wrapped up, isn't he?
Yeah.
So, a couple of weeks till he heads off to Namibia, and then he's got Peru. But also, there's a bigger cause going on as well as the chasing 8 races. You got a bigger cause in mind, the scholarship idea.
Yeah. So we've kicked off this Kia Mau Kia Ora scholarship, and we're just basically in the process of really just starting, but just trying to raise money to sort of get help sort of kids. I suppose the biggest thing, develop their full potential. I guess the whole idea behind it, just by sort of challenging them to do things that they wouldn't normally do, and just sort of reset their mindset of what they're capable of doing. We've made some good contacts and stuff with some of the schools and things like that, and fundraising this year. In order to get the scholarship, though, they have to, we'll put them through a little bit of a running expedition.
Yeah.
Rather than just give them some cash. And I think they'll learn more from that than actually the scholarship itself. And once that sort of happens, we'll support them for whatever they want to do.
So the scholarship itself is not a running scholarship. It's not like
No, it's just part of the scholarship process. Yeah. So, I mean, you can give. Well, what I've found is, people go to university or they go to do studies or they go whatever, and you can give them money, and then that's just spent. They're always grateful for it, but they spend it and they don't learn from it. But we want to actually challenge people so that it helps them develop, I suppose, a better mindset for whatever career path they want to follow. So, I mean, we'll still support them financially at the end, but they're going to have to come do one of these multi-day races first.
How do you think that's going to get out?
Oh, it'll be interesting because we're obviously going to pick people that who need sort of support. We're not looking for the kids that have got all that sort of family support or strong school support. We're going to be successful anyhow. We want the ones that are a little bit of troublemakers or having a bit of a rough time and don't have any sort of I suppose mentors or figures to look up to, who if they didn't have something to help reset their mindset might end up in sort of going down a alternative path in life. I think they'll struggle, some of them, but that's all part of the process.
So that's the thing, isn't it? It's not just about, like you're saying, it's not just about the money. It's about trying to give them some mentorship and some guidance and a bit of direction maybe.
Yeah, and just reset what they think they can do.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, most kids or most people wouldn't think they can go out and run 250 Ks, but you can. I mean, we all know you can go out and do an ultra, really. It's just a matter of how much it's going to suck or how much it's going to hurt.
I think we've all proved. I think we've all proved that.
So my mates always ask, when can you run a 100k race, or when can you enter? And I was like, well, if you can run a K comfortably, you can run 10 Ks. You're just not going to enjoy it. Same with an ultra. If you can run 10 Ks comfortably, you'll do 100. You're just not going to enjoy it. That's all. But you can do it.
Yeah.
You just got to tell your mind you can do it.
So how can people help?
We've got a lot of the ultra running community is quite good in New Zealand. Like, everyone's quite friendly, and everybody knows a lot of people. So we've got a lot of people that are willing to help out with mentoring and stuff in different professions and things, which is really good. We're getting some skills involved. I guess the fundraising side of it is the big thing at the moment.
Yep.
We set up a target sort of quite for the first year of raising 20,000, so we can start giving a few kids through it. And depending on how much we raise, will depend on how many kids we can start doing the scholarship for. I mean, we've only really just sort of started kicking off, and we're already $1,000 in, so So I suppose all that's probably the biggest thing. You know,
So we'll put a link in the show notes.
Absolutely.
and we're selling some limited edition like shirts for our running company, for Hunts Way Run Co, and all the profits from that go to the scholarship, and that's doing quite well. Otherwise, I suppose it's just getting word of mouth out there. I think I think a lot of people are keen for this sort of thing. They just need to know about it.
Yeah.
I guess it changes that mindset from that sort of, as runners, we can get quite amorphous when we decide to, and you'll see people, and it's with very noble intentions, they will raise for something. They will raise to draw advocacy for a broad topic, but this is focused. This is actually going to be life-changing, potentially, for a group of kids who, as you said, you get to certain points during your development where you meet those gates or those pathways, and you can either go down one path or the other. Or it's not even that the two things can exist at the same time, because it's not that binary for a lot of people, right? But it's a worthy cause, so please give generously.
Because I look at my life, and I could have gone down the wrong way quite easy. I was just lucky that I had parents that supported you. School was shit.
Well,
back in the
you've
80s.
told that story, haven't you, of your experience at school when you left, what you were told, and that could have set the direction of your life
quite easily.
in a terrible way.
Yeah, quite easily. Because I was young. You're a big dude, and back in those days, you're full of testosterone and aggression and stuff, and people were, bullying you and stuff for being mouldy and stuff for all these schools and stuff, and you could have quite easily, just let the rage take over a bit and just been in a completely different space you are now. It's just that I was lucky enough to have, mum and dad who sort of kept you on the straight and narrow. Some of these kids don't, and that's the thing. They just need somebody to say, well, actually just to believe in them that they can do something,
Yeah.
And it's almost wider than that, mum and dad, isn't it? It's that kind of, I think about, in a very watered down sense, very watered down our own kids. I think about it's the aunties and uncles as well, eh? It's all those avuncular figures in your life, the people who perhaps are one step removed from the parents who your kid's never going to listen to, but Uncle Scott tells you to do something, you're going to do it.
So that's what, like you say, quite a focus to the scholarship. We'll keep eye. Well, the plan is, we'll keep an eye on these, young people as they develop all the way through their careers. We're not just going to give them, an experience and just let them loose. The whole idea is to sort of follow them through, and and hopefully they'll turn around when they're successful or whatever and do the same for somebody else. So I've run for different causes and stuff in the past before as well, and you do it and you raise some money and it goes off somewhere. You never know what happens really or what difference it makes or whatever. But I've got to the time in my life where I've got time to focus on this stuff now, and we'll follow these young people all the way through.
And just because that's the thing, isn't it? As a society, we see kids who we think are quite unquite going off the rails or whatever, and that's it, and they're sort of immediately kind of pigeonholed, and that's it.
Yeah.
Whereas oftentimes it's those kids, they're like that because they're full of energy and ideas, and within history there are so many examples of those sorts of figures who in their early lives they were ratbags. But that's because they were just so full of something that it only took one person to go, you know what? You actually you are somebody. You're not just a.
It's the classic kid at school who doesn't pay attention because he's just too bright.
Or you get the sense that one stream of kids with ADD goes to art school, one stream of kids with ADD goes to prison.
Exactly.
And it's actually acknowledging that stuff and the prevalence of all that stuff. Look, have you talked about running?
Well, we
have.
I'm just here for the running content.
We talked about how I learned from last year not to do the full marathon. I'm doing the half today.
Well, it's a new course, and it's
not too late.
It's really going to hurt some feelings. On that second time round.
But also, we've talked about how what this challenge that he's facing this year is more about travel than it is about actual running.
Oh, the logistics side of it. I'm lucky that the missus sorts out a lot of that, because it just do my head in. I just so busy with work and stuff as well. I just can't juggle the stuff. But she's like one of those travel gurus. When you show up at the airport, it's like, where's my passport? Because she's stolen or whatever, But she's got everything laid out, which is awesome. So she's doing that.
And Doug's got a sibling. Doug the dog.
Yeah, Doug the dog's got a sibling, Fox. She's about half the size. and like twice as friendly.
4 times as much energy.
Yeah, she's like a firm missile around the track, eh? But she's lovely. She's just really super friendly and super excited.
Yeah. Hey, well, look, all the best for Namibia and then Peru shortly afterwards. I know.
Well, it's actually Peru that's going to be the one. That'll be the problem. That'll be the toughest race, or probably one of the toughest out of all of them.
Why is that?
Just the altitude and the climate and the short turnaround. I mean, it's like, probably 2.5, 3 weeks from the finish of one to the next. So, and with all the travel on, it's just going to be tired. Just going to be so.
Just fueling on guinea pigs.
Yeah.
Trying to get them in your pocket, your pack.
Can't you drink the coffee from their poo or something? Or
I don't know what website you've been on, but I don't know if that's a thing.
Yeah, probably try that after the race.
I had this thing on stage 3. Suddenly, I'm
sure
explosively ill.
Weight loss, awesome weight loss program.
Yeah, it's cutting. I'm cutting weight by being sick.
Shredding. Rightio. All right. Hey, well, look, you better go and get ready to run this 21k out in Riverhead before you head off to Namibia and then Peru.
Well, Riverhead
they all go in the same sentence.
It is the Namibia of the Rodney district, Riverhead Forest.
Of the whole district, or just this part of the district?
Riverhead Forest is the Namibia of the Riverhead district.
Right. Okay. All right. Hey, well, look, all the best, and
Cheers,
awesome. we'll shove that link in the show notes, so check it out.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
I would like to add that I just sort of wandered over and came in midway through that conversation. I had no idea that you were actually recording.
Yeah.
I just sort of saw you two and took a little moment to come see my friend. So that was really cool. But what an amazing! It's always when you talk to Iniera, he's such a thoughtful gentleman, and he is. Yeah, he's an inspiration. He really
is. Look, we'll put the link, as we said, in the show notes. And also, if you want to have a listen, we caught up with him on episode 215, and we should probably put that in the show notes too. I will also, this wasn't our podcast, but the Between Two Beers podcast chat with him is worth a listen to if you want to have a bit more of a deep dive into him and his background and what drives him and inspires him.
Absolutely. Well worth it. If you're going to cheat on us with a podcast, it might as well be
True.
them. Speaking of Christchurch, not that we were, but speaking of Christchurch, we are doing our first ever live show at Further Faster, Otutahi Christchurch, 25th April, Anzac Day. So the store will be shut on Anzac Day, but they're opening up especially for us. We're gonna be down there. We're gonna be having a bit of a yarn about Dirt Church Radio. We've been doing this for a long time. We've got tons of stories to tell. Jules is threatening to ask us some questions.
I'm really worried about
do a bit of Q&A. Yeah, me too. Me too. And we're going to be joined by two very special guests. Jess Griff Campbell, she's a Canadian who lives in Christchurch and is carving it up on the running scene, and Michael Mitchell, who's an adventure racer, trail runner, shark attack survivor, and also done a little trot in the UK called the Bob Graham Round. So can't wait.
That's going to be cool. So that's going to be fun. And then on the Saturday, we're going to scoot along to the Skedaddle. Can you do that? Yes, at Island Hill Station. It's going to be a fun weekend. Again, we'll put a link to where you can get the tickets in the show notes. Right, running across Australia. So Nick Ashall, who we featured on episode 203, remember he at that point completed an incredible journey across America. He had started it previously and then was involved in a horrible hit and run, ended up critically injured, very lucky to survive. Well, he's back at it, and this time he's running across Australia, and it's a 3,949 kilometre journey that he's embarking on from Perth to Sydney, which he'll be starting next week by the time this comes out. He's also aiming to raise money for respiratory research. He flicked us a note and he said, "It's been a challenging 12 months with getting my body in the right shape and some big kilometres over the past 3 months. The support crew is in place and we're ready to get this challenge underway." So he's given, he's going to give it a decent crack. We'll put a link, as we said, in the show notes, provide you the details of the route, his story, the purpose, and how you can donate to the cause that he's supporting, respiratory research, which is very dear to his heart, as you'll remember after listening to that episode 203. He's got some cool sponsors on board as well, Tailwind, 020 and Hoka. Right. Me again.
On to our...
Yeah.
Yeah, you get... Well, I mean, I don't want to... you had the pleasure of speaking to this amazing person, so...
Well, he's a alumni of Dirt Church Radio. We had him on episode 37 where we enjoyed that chat, didn't we? We just kind of like stared at each other a lot of it because it was just amazing. And then also his good wife, Catherine Switzer, KV Switzer, was on episode 45 as well. But Roger Robinson, he's an age group world champion runner and emeritus professor at Victoria University, where he was in the English department for years, among other roles that he had there. He's a world-leading writer on running, a delightful, engaging teller of stories and commentator. He shares his time between Wellington and New York with Catherine, who of course is the women's running pioneer. So Roger has a new book out titled Running Throughout Time, The Greatest Running Stories Ever Told. He will tell you in this interview that he actually hates that title, by the way. But anyway, the book is full of fascinating research and discoveries, from chapters about Atlanta, the heroic woman of ancient Greece, to Alison Rowe, our very own, the New Zealander who won the New York Marathon. Roger, in his research, arguably discovered the true roots of trail running in a ditch. It's a great story. You've got to hear it. And he busts some myths about running in this spectacular book, and he talks all about it in this interview. Look, it was an absolute pleasure speaking with him again. You're going to love it. And yeah, I'd encourage you to go back and have a listen to episode 37 and episode 45. But have a listen to this one first when we get to it. But first, this. Greatest run ever.
Greatest run ever.
Greatest run ever, which is the part of the show where we ask you to write into us and tell us your greatest run ever. Doesn't have to be a race or a mountain summit. It might just be a run around the block, something that's sung to you for some reason. Send them in to us at dirtchurchradio@gmail.com. And we have a recidivist greatest run ever today. A man who was recently knighted for his services to Vertical Gain, Mr. Brooke Van Reenen. And he writes in, he says, "Hey guys, long-time fan and repeat greatest run. Offender here, but I think I have nailed it this time. In 2015, I was introduced to what would become a life-changing moment for me. I was super lucky and won an entry into the Kepler Challenge. I was introduced into the magical world of trail and ultra running, which has since become a massive part of my life and made me who I am. While I completed the loop that year, I've gone on to finish 3 more or so, hoping to collect my 5-year bling this year and join the likes of legends Dan Jones and Matt Raymond." I think Dan Jones in capitals, Matt Raymond in like 8 font.
No, we've established this. You own it.
In that elusive club. I digress. Te Anau and the Kepler track holds a special place in my heart. Last year, I got the peak bagging bug hard and had the audacious goal of trying to summit 100 peaks in a calendar year. It was a really cool thing to do, and I got to visit lots of new places, immerse myself in nature, and see some amazing sights. One of the peaks included a Mount Luxmore on the Kepler track, a summit you don't actually hit during the race, so I had to make a special trip. While collecting medals and crossing finish lines is cool, this run was truly special. After cruising to Te Anau the day before, I camped out so I could get an early start and hopefully be on the tops for sunrise. Waking up super early, I slowly got ready and procrastinated a bit with my morning coffee, scrolling Insta as you do, before making my way to the start of the track. As it was dark, I couldn't see what the weather was doing, but the forecast was for a nice day, so I started the first flat 5k cruise to Broad Bay. With my head torch lighting the path and my music cranking, I was underway and got into that nice rhythm. 40 minutes in, and something stopped me in my tracks. I couldn't believe what I saw. A kiwi, minding its own business, peeking at the ground with its massive beak, not even bothered that I was there. I just stood there in awe, watching it for what felt like forever. But it was only a couple of minutes sharing this moment with the elusive bird and my first kiwi ever spotted in the wild. In an instant, he or she was gone into that bush, so I carried on. No more than 5 minutes later, another one, which must have been startled by the sounds I was making, sprinted across the track in front of me and disappeared out of sight. I couldn't believe it. In all my 37 years, I'd gone from never seeing kiwi to now seeing 2 birds 5 minutes apart. I carried on, and the sunrise above the bushline turned out to be better than expected. Luxmore Hut came into view, and it was late July. It was pretty chilly on the top, so I stopped to put on some more layers. The care at the hut was being its usual pesky self, and one of the trampers informed me that this particular kea is a local at the hut called Melsby. While these birds are always rad to see, seeing the kiwi kind of outdid the kea this time around. I continued on, making my way up, chucked on my microspikes as I got above the snow line and made my way to the summit of Mount Luxmore. Goal reached, summit bagged, and mandatory photos taken. It was time to head back down and pretend I was in the Luxmore grunt, so I gave it some jandal. It's an odd feeling crossing the control gates when there isn't a race on, but I wrapped it up very satisfied with the day's work and headed to my regular when visiting the Tiano, the Sandfly Cafe, for some much-needed delicious coffee and food. How can a run like that be topped? Hopefully I will get to see you guys in Tiano for the 2024 Kepler edition and get my 5-year finish. Greatest run ever.
Wow, Brooke. Oh, that you have definitely nailed it. Definitely nailed it. You know, wild kiwi encounters, the micro spikes getting up to the mountain, and Sandfly Cafe.
Yeah.
You got the triple.
Yeah.
You got the triple.
You got the triple. In fact, the last time we were in Tiano, we had lunch with Brooke at the Sandfly Cafe.
Indeed.
Or breakfast.
Yeah.
Maybe it was brunch. Who knows? But fantastic dude. Thanks, Brooke. And rest of you, keep sending them in.
Yeah.
Keep sending them in.
Do
that. dirtchurchradio@gmail.com.
Or be like Brooke and send us multiple.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he's, you know,
now,
he
while
has
you're
nailed
there,
it. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, he has nailed it. No, while you're there, don't forget to sign up to the new podcast and newsletter on Substack.
Yes.
Join the Aid Station crew.
Do that. You should also listen to our interview with Roger Robinson, which is coming up now. Roger Robinson, welcome back to Dirt Church Radio. Would you believe it's almost 4 years since we had you on, episode 37?
Well, that 4 years just went by in a blink, didn't it, Eugene? Because we had COVID and kind of nothing happened for 2 years. So really only 2 years.
That's true. We don't count those ones. Yeah, I was going to say nothing much happened, but it's been a busy old time for you as usual.
Well, actually, during that time, you know, COVID was in a strange way quite a good time because Catherine and I were here in New Zealand. Which we love anyway, and so less busy and less rushing around and going to events than usual. And I just got down and got some good running done and some good writing done. And so that's basically when this book got done.
Oh, brilliant. There we go. You made use of it. And you're at home as a bachelor this week. Is Catherine off doing some amazing adventures?
Well, it used to be, you know, I'm a great reader of Jane Austen and writers like that. And back in those days, ladies of mature years used to get together and do embroidery. But now they go off and do the Heathy track. Which is what Catherine is doing with 4 other women. I last heard from her this morning just as they were about to set out on the bus to the beginning of the track. And so she's out in some hut now. I forget which one. The Heathy hut, I think, the first one, and then heads into the mountains tomorrow. Yes, so yes, indeed. I'm just getting up to mischief and talking to you.
Bachelor life. That's right. What
and
mischief?
Going to the footy on Saturday night.
Oh, very good.
Well, that's what blokes do. It's just the Hurricanes and the Blues, and I'm going along with a mate to watch the rugby.
Fantastic. Well, let's see what mischief we can get up to in this chat. Look, there is so much to talk about, and we know it's important to pace ourselves. I think that's one lesson I learned again and again in your wonderful book. But congratulations on running throughout time the greatest running stories ever told.
Thank you. I'm pleased with almost everything about it, Eugene, except the title.
I didn't know whether to bring that up.
Well, my title was very simple. It was Running's Greatest Stories, which I thought was impactful and accurate. But the publisher felt they needed to make it a bit longer for some reason. I'm not quite sure why. Every time I type it out, I'm trying to do it. Of course, I have to a lot for publicity purposes, and I hate them every time because it always takes me so long to type out this rather laborious title. But I still think of it as Running's Greatest Stories, which is what it is. Almost all the great stories of running.
Yeah,
with a few left out for various reasons.
Yeah,
largely because either I or somebody else had already told them. Well, you know, like Catherine going back to her book, and or Eugene Emil Zatopek, for instance, which I'd written about in my previous book, and a Baby Bikila, and so I didn't want to go over that material again. So there are a few things that if you did a kind of top 20 stories you would want in. But just given those provisos, these are, on the whole, some very familiar stories, and then also a few that are much less familiar, but I still think are really, really great, and where I'd got interesting things to say about them.
I was going to say many of the stories were familiar to me, or at least I thought they were. And what you've managed to do is bust some myths about our sport, some of which trace back thousands of years.
Yeah, I tried to do that. Not just for the sake of it, but just there's kind of two sides of it. There's the one side that loves running and loves colourful, romantic, exciting stories about running, and there's another side that's the boring old scholar that wants to get it all right. And so in a way, I decided to put that stuff in. I could have just told the stories, but then I found that the process of establishing what really did happen was so interesting and often so controversial that I wanted to put that stuff in. So every time there is the story of, say, Phidippides, but there's also the story of finding out what the actual story was, and what sources I went to, and what kind of work it required, and the research was much more interesting than just calling it research, which sounds as if you spend your whole time in the university library.
I imagined you as some sort of detective going around and finding evidence and digging up stories, and some of them took you decades. It must have been quite exciting.
Some of them are a lifetime. I mean, I've always loved running, and I've loved the stories about running. And like most people, I read the stories and I believed them. I believed that Phidippides dropped dead, and I believed that the royal children looked out of the window of Windsor Castle, and that's why the marathon started there. All of those things. And then when I started writing for magazines, sometimes I started to do more research. But of course, research is never ending. You just go on finding things all the time, finding out more things, and finding that things that you'd always assumed were right actually weren't. And it's just a fascinating process. And yes, you're right about the like it's a detective story, which it is in many aspects. And what I'm particularly pleased with is having found, looking at the 1908 Olympic marathon, where Dorando Pietri collapsed everybody's always said 5 times. In fact, it was 7 times. And most websites will tell you that Conan Doyle, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, was out there on the track helping him across the finish line. And I kind of thought, well, I'm interested in Conan Doyle, and I read Sherlock Holmes, and I'll check on that. I found it wasn't Conan Doyle at all. He was actually, eventually, I had the brilliant idea, which nobody had thought of before, of reading Conan Doyle's own autobiography and finding that he was hired as a journalist. He said he doesn't normally do sports reporting, but he couldn't resist the chance to see the Olympic marathon from a good seat in the stand. So he tells us exactly where he is, and he describes it wonderfully. And then I found, and this is the bit that really tickled me, then I found the story that he was writing at that time was called Wisteria Lodge. And he wanted a name for a heroic figure, a martyr who gets assassinated by an evil dictator. Not that we have evil dictators in the world these days, but back then they did. And he chose the name Dorando, and he called him Victor Dorando. And so he had taken that name straight from Dorando Pietri and made him Victor, which means the winner. And of course, the Brits really believed that Pietri was the real runner. And I'm glad to say that a version of that article was published just late last Sherlock Holmes Mystery Magazine in London. So another publication credit for me.
That's the thing. He was hiding in plain sight all along, and that was the thing that intrigued me so often, was these stories that I sort of just assumed were right. You found evidence. Sometimes you had to go to great lengths, but oftentimes it was just there to be found. Maybe not so much with the story of the Battle of Marathon and the story of the quote unquote original marathon. That sounded like an epic tale. Can you tell us what, without giving away too many spoilers, what you discovered and why you think the story just took hold in the way that it did and survived for so long?
Oh, because it's a great that's the best question, isn't it? Because it's a great story. We all love stories of people dropping dead at the end of races. And it's part of our language. I died with 200 to go. I often say that if the people in the future take our running language literally, as we tend to take the running language of the past, imagine what a view they'd get of our sport. He really screwed me on the third lap, and I died. And he died, and he was dead. It's all kind of colourful metaphor. And running history, so-called running legend, is full of people who drop down dead. There's this Welsh shepherd who dropped down dead because when he finished the race, his girlfriend slapped him on the back and he dropped dead on the spot, supposedly. Now, did he really? We'll never know. But it's a great story, and that's why we love it. With the Pheidippides story, I had the advantage of being interested in literature. I'm not a classicist and I don't speak Greek. I can struggle through a bit of Latin, but not Greek. But I was able to go to the sources and find what was said and realize that the first instance of anybody saying that Pheidippides ran from Marathon to Athens and dropped down dead came in a Roman writer in the 1st century AD. That's 600 years after the Battle of Marathon. That's like somebody now discovering something about Shakespeare. It's that long ago. And so we can't take it as a reliable source. It's just the guy got mixed up. And I think that's a natural explanation. He was wanting to refer to Pheidippides, remember that he was a messenger, remember that there's one version which he supposedly said, "Rejoice, we are victorious." He was talking about the word rejoice. And he mixed up Pheidippides with that person, the person who said rejoice, with the guy who ran from Athens to Sparta to try and get the Spartans to help in the battle. It's just like, as I said in the book, people introduced me as Roger Bannister quite often. And we all know, we all mix things up. If you really want to annoy Catherine, you just mix her up with Rosie Ruiz.
That's one tip I won't be picking up.
Which people do.
I'll let you know. I'll let you in a little secret, that little embarrassing secret, that Matt and I often refer to you as Sir Roger Robinson. So I think you should probably take that one.
Spelt C-U-R. I don't believe in knighthoods. Old-fashioned garbage. We shouldn't have them in this country. Just a lot of nonsense. But that's a different matter.
Speaking of Roger Bannister, of course, you also mentioned in the book how you were there at his time trial. Was it a week before the 4-minute mile?
It was a few months before. I forget how long of it was when he did the 3/4 mile. Yeah. But I'm one of the few people who was alive at that time that doesn't claim I was there on the night of the 4-minute mile. I am realistic about that. Chris Brasher used to say that he had met at least 3,000 people who claimed to be among the 300 who were there that night. And that happens all the time.
Yes.
People were always actually there, or you get so familiar with the story you begin to believe that you were there. So yes, I did see him, and I met him then in later life. I met him once at the centenary of the English AAA, about 1984, something like that. And that was the night when I told him that I'd named my cat after him. And he didn't seem nearly as impressed as I thought he should be.
Ungrateful sod.
Yeah, I mean, there's no higher praise. I had this cat called Bannister because I got the cat just a few weeks after the 4-minute mile.
There we go. But you were there the night that he ran sub 3 for 3/4 of a mile.
For 3/4. Yes. Yeah.
And pestered him for an autograph.
I did, and I have that in the book, in my autograph book, along with a few others.
Yes. Wonderful.
From that era.
Yeah.
The entire Fulham FC football team and a few other things.
Oh, that sounds like another podcast.
Yes.
Now, look, one story that I did want to dig into, because I loved the story behind the story was your pursuit through time, really, of Samuel Butler. For those unfamiliar with him, can you tell us a little bit about him and the Hounds Club, and then how you retraced his steps?
Yeah, that's an accident. I'm kind of lucky because I'm interested in more than one thing, and sometimes I find things by accident. Like I was interested in Daniel Defoe, for instance, because I was teaching Robinson Crusoe and Moll Flanders and things like that, and I got interested because I've always been interested in journalism and its relationship to so-called literature, and I've always objected to the rigid division between those two in the academic mind. And so Defoe was an absolutely great journalist, and I was reading some of his journalism in the British Library, and I found this account of a race between running footmen, February 1719, and I realized, and put this in the book, that unless anybody challenges me, and they haven't so far, what I'd found was the world's first piece of sports journalism. And I found it kind of by accident because Defoe was producing this weekly magazine under the name of Appleby. Wasn't even his own name. But anyway, I found that. So that was one. So then Samuel Butler was a writer I've been interested in since just after I arrived in New Zealand in 1968, when I learned about him being in Canterbury, and I was teaching at the University of Canterbury at that time. And I put on a seminar at the University of Canterbury for the centenary of the publication of his great book, Erewhon. So he's known as the author of this great ironic satire, Erewhon, and then of an autobiographical novel called The Way of All Flesh. Those are the two things that he's most known for. And I got interested in him because of some similarities. And I found in The Way of All Flesh a passage about running across country. And then I realized that he'd actually spent 4.5 years in Canterbury. He'd come out to Sheep Farm and made a success of that. And there's a whole story there, which I won't go into now. And that's another book, which you might hear about someday. And so then I was in England on study leave, and Samuel Butler was one of my topics. So quite legitimately, I went to Shrewsbury School in Shropshire in England to try and look at some of the stuff about his school days, because he'd left some paintings there and things like that. He was an artist as well as a writer. And in the course of it, I was in the school library, and the school librarian, very nice classicist, told me about the Hounds books, as they were called, these handwritten books, and thought I might be interested. And so I got access and spent these days reading these old notebooks, kind of bound notebooks, handwritten. And they were the records of the Hounds, which was the school cross-country club. And they did paper chasing, and they did an annual steeplechase, as they called it. Steeplechase means, if your listeners don't know, was originally a race across country from one village steeple to the next. And you just went straight across the country, and the horses would jump fences and rivers and all sorts. So it was just a really, really tough cross-country race. The boys adapted that into a running race, and that was the first form of cross-country running. And Shrewsbury School was, in fact, the first to have any form of cross-country running. It was before rugby, which people had always thought was the first. So I found that, and I was sitting there in the school library and realizing this is evident. What I've got here, these handwritten notes by very roguish schoolboys, very wicked and funny schoolboys. And one of their favorite places to run was down what they call Fornicators Lane, for instance. So they were like normal, 15, 16-year-old boys. I realized I got evidence of the absolute beginnings of the modern sport of running. No, here it was. Here was cross-country running in its very first beginnings. They'd done by these kids organizing their own races, and they were just imitating their fathers who did hare hunting or fox hunting. And they called it Fox and Hounds, or just the Hounds. And these notebooks were called the Hounds books. That was a fascinating piece of kind of research discovery. And of course, I was supposed to be writing a serious literary book about Samuel Butler. Nobody could blame me for getting interested in that. I just found a big chunk of the history of running as a sport.
Absolutely. But you didn't stop there with these notebooks. You then went on a chase, a literal chase, dodging, sort of supermarket traffic and potholes and going up dead end streets and all sorts.
I ended up going to Shrewsbury, I think 3 or 4 times altogether. Last time I was there, and I was a guest at, they have this annual school cross country race, and I was a guest, and so I got photographs of how they still dress up. The club captain is still dressed up as a huntsman and has a horn which he blows at the start of the race. So they do all those things. They're also a good one of the stronger school running teams as well. So yes, I followed it all through and ran. I mean, I was still running pretty well in those days. I was in my 40s or 50s or something, and I could run around the countryside. And what I particularly wanted, there was one episode when Samuel Butler was a fox. And this is an aspect of his biography that nobody knew about. In The Way of All Flesh, he presents himself as completely downtrodden. He calls himself a muff, a mollycoddle. He was feeble. He was weak. He couldn't play footy, any of those things. That's the image he decided to present to himself. Well, that's wrong, because he was actually one of the school's best runners, and he was made club captain in his last year. So he must have been good, and not only good, but popular, which is quite unlike the version he puts into the novel. So there's literary history in this as well. And I subtitled that chapter An Experiment in Biography, because it's a way of revising the biography of a great writer, showing that his version was in fact very loaded and very selected and doesn't fit with this kind of evidence that nobody except a nutcase like me would have been interested in, because nobody else would have been interested in the notebooks of the school running club. So then I found Butler there as the captain of the hounds. On this one run, he was a fox, and they laid the trail, he and the other fox laid the trail, as it were, across a sheet of water, which looked quite innocent. It looked like a field, a paddock, about 2 or 3 inches deep in water. But in fact, in the middle, there was what the hound book called a treacherous drain, that we would call a ditch, a big ditch, 3 or 4 feet deep. And so that the foxes laid the trail going down to the water, and then they laid it going up the hill, the other side of the water, and all the hounds came chasing after and ran through the water, and then they all fell into the ditch, because at that point it was suddenly 3 or 4 feet deep, and while Butler and the other lads sat there chortling with laughter. So it's a nice story, and I was trying to find this. This is what you're onto. I was trying to find this ditch. I spent 3 or 4 heavy research days, running around the Shropshire countryside trying to find a wet ditch, and trying to go for all supermarkets and pubs and car parks and screaming roads and things like that these days. But I actually found it by persistence and chance, and I found it's unmistakable. There's the ditch is almost filled in, eroded now. But it's quite unmistakable as a dark green patch across the middle of this very modest field with a couple of scruffy trees. And I would regard that as one of my great research discoveries. But I'm not sure how the research funding people in New Zealand would see that. But it's valuable. It's part of the history of running. It's part of the biography of Samuel Butler, and so it has all of that double value. And I found it fascinating. And in writing about it, I try to communicate that sense of just excitement and surprise, and as well as a certain droll sense that finding a wet ditch is not something that literary scholars normally spend much time on.
Well, some people go to the moon. Some people stand at the side of a soggy ditch. That's just,
yes, exactly. Yes, there you are. Thank you, Eugene.
But it did come through in the book, and it felt like you experienced a bit of a moment, and it was I don't know, was it emotional?
Yes, I mean, all research and discoveries are, and you don't kind of leap up and down. Because you're in a library often, or at the end of we'll get way out on a long run, and then you've got to get back to the motel, all that kind of thing. But yes, it's exciting thinking about it and writing about it. And there are a few moments in this book, and one was that Daniel Defoe one, and realizing I just found the very earliest piece of sports journalism. So all you lot and your wife and so on, they all grew out of that one little moment. And then the Samuel Butler was another. And another one, I think, was, this is not really trail running, but on the track. There was that occasion in 1928 when everybody had always said that the women all collapsed. And I'd watched the film footage, which is supplied by the library at the Olympic Library at Lausanne. And they supply this film footage, which has been used in one or two documentary films like Free to Run. And it shows, first clip is the start of the race. Second clip, they're going along the back straight on the first lap. Third clip is that they're coming through the bell, still moving fast. Fourth clip is the finish with two women crossing the finish together and one of them falling over. And I watched that over and over again, just trying to make sense of it. And my eureka moment was, and this came after I'd published versions of this story, when I realized that last clip wasn't the final at all. It just didn't fit. I kept wondering, why is the winner and the second place getter, why are they on the inside of the track? How did they get there that fast? They weren't 20 seconds ahead. They were 3 seconds ahead. They couldn't have got there that fast. It just kept puzzling me and puzzling. And it finally dawned on me, this is one of the heats where somebody fell over. And one interpretation is the people putting the film together were so determined to get film of somebody falling over that they cut that in. They edited that in instead of showing the real finish when the first three women broke the official world record, and the first 7 women, I think it was, broke the world record as it had been. The first 3 broke the ratified world record, and the next 4 all broke the previous record before that one was ratified. So just that realization, I'm not a film expert, but I suddenly realized that we believe film. You look at it and you think that must be right, but actually don't is the short answer. And the same with the photographs. Of course, a number of photographs have been used of the finish of that race. More than half of them are in fact of the same 2 runners, Radke and Hitomi, the German and the Japanese, who were first and second, finishing together. That's their heat. That's not the final where they were actually over a second apart. So again, that was another eureka moment when I thought, oh. And there were all different kinds of research that this book demanded.
And that sort of, that forensic examination of the footage and of photographs and so on enabled you to expose a shocking example of sexism, which held women back for decades, perhaps even still now.
Yeah, there are still people who would believe that it's not appropriate for women to be seen doing exhausting occupations. So please don't tell her that my wife is on the Heafy track at this moment, clumping around with her pack. And one of the things I say elsewhere in the book is it's about Gabrielle Anderson Schiess in the 1984 Olympic Marathon. She was the Swiss runner based in America, so we know her quite well, who got heat exhaustion and really staggered around the last lap and was out of it, completely out of it, and just staggering about. And everybody thought she was going to collapse. She didn't quite. She knew enough. Her brain was still functioning, but the body just wasn't coordinated. But it didn't destroy women's marathon running, as it might have done. People just saw her more as heroic rather than as inappropriate. And I said in the book, so at last women had earned the right to be exhausted in public, which took a lot of doing. But that 1928 one, we'll never know exactly how it came about, but there was an astonishing consistency between the newspaper reports when they were all wrong. And it's really I'd have to say, I'm sorry, because you're a sports journalist. It's a disgraceful episode in sports journalism. either they were paid for it, or you can imagine a kind of conspiracy in the bar. You know, the male journalist blokes in the bar saying, "Oh, you know, these Sheilas, they've got no business. Look, and they all collapsed. They didn't all collapse, and reports had." You know, one of the key ones is 11 wretched women as the headline in the New York News. Well, there are only 9 women in the race. And he claimed that 4 of them collapsed and 4 of them didn't finish the race. Well, the evidence is that the official results, I haven't been able to go deeper down than 8, but at least 8 women finished. Whether the 9th one finished or not, I don't know, and haven't managed to establish that. But there was no dropping out. And they didn't collapse. They fell onto the grass, as people do. And these days, watch any race on television, and they all fall down at the finish. It's kind of part of the show, and then the camera goes around and and gets them interacting with each other and lying there and looking exhausted and sitting up and all of that. It's kind of part of the entertainment. We don't think twice about it, men and women. But at that time, it was seen as utterly inappropriate that women should do something as bad as collapse. And so it was really invented. I think 2 or 3 did actually fall to the grass, which is what. How often have you fallen to the grass at the finish of the race? I certainly have.
Well, I for one, have never run under a world record, but I imagine if I ever did, I would collapse to the grass, no doubt about it, or well before then. But that was the point, wasn't it? Was that 7 of them? I think,
yes. And they'd all run over their heads, and some of them were sprinters. You know, they weren't 800 runners, and so they just experienced something, a completely new kind of exhaustion. So yes, it was trying to explain this. I try. Now I always try and be fair and not just criticize people or slag people off just for the sake of it. And one way of not justifying it but explaining it is to say this is 1928. World War I was only 10 years ago. The population of Europe had been devastated by that war, by first of all the war, by the number of men who were killed, and then by the flu epidemic that followed afterwards. The world as a whole, but especially Europe, had been devastated. And so you could say something almost subconscious might have been going on by way of trying to preserve women to have babies and not to go running around a track and falling down and getting exhausted and doing those things. Their job is to look pretty and then have babies. And in a way, the most revealing piece of journalism that I found, very simple, was I think it was the London Daily Mail, who described the runners coming out onto the track to run the race, and it said they skipped daintily into the field. Now, what a cliche, and what a stereotype. That's what women were supposed to do. I've been watching track and women's running for the last 80 years or so almost. I've never seen them skip daintily into the field. That's not to disparage them at all, but they don't skip daintily. That's not what they do. They're about to run a race. They're either running or they're jogging, they're warming, they're loosening up, they're doing something, they're moving just like men do before a race. All this skip daintily, that was just imposing a stereotype on them. Absolutely fascinating the way the language works and the way the male journalists were working through a kind of filter of, as you say, sexist prejudice at that time.
It was almost a mass hysteria, but in the opposite way, it was being characterized as. But it was like they had been captured by some mass hysteria, the journalists. And by the way, I apologize on behalf of all journalists for that episode.
That's all right. I'm one myself. And you're having a bad time anyway, so I don't want to add to it. I'll send some money to stuff.
I'm not there anymore. It's fine. Yeah.
No, I know. No. But one mate is, so
yes,
I'll try and keep him in his job.
True.
But yes, a mass hysteria, kind of conspiracy or reluctance to accept something new that was happening, and it carried on, of course, into the 1960s. And it's still there in some ways, and It's taking a lot of work to establish women. We've turned the corner, I think, in the last few years. And I think the women's football and women's rugby were absolutely crucial. And of course, I would claim credit, I think, that running and athletics have been ahead of the game. And the welcoming of women into running right up to the marathon happened very early in the history of feminism. I think it was really important as a major development in giving women absolutely equal opportunity. And as I say somewhere in the book, it's runners are kind of like what the stage people call colorblind, and also gender blind, because if you're in a race, they're not black or Asian or woman or male, they're runners, and there's somebody who's trying to beat you and you try and beat them. And that's all there is to it. And you accept them. And if anybody is prepared to become a runner and do the work that entails, they are welcome. And I always say that running is absolutely inclusive in that way. And that's one of the wonderful things about it, but one of the things I love about it. Absolutely.
You mentioned the advancement of women through the marathon, and obviously particularly the work beyond Boston, the work that Catherine did to get the marathon on the Olympic program. And then we look at the role that New Zealand women played in, Anne Ordain, Lorraine Moller, and of course Alison Rowe, who you write so beautifully of. What trailblazers they were, and probably don't get the recognition in their own country that they deserve.
Yes, I don't know about that. That's partly because Lorraine and Anne, for perfectly good reasons, have chosen to live overseas, and so they're not going to get the kind of recognition that they would if they stayed here. And Alison is pretty cool about being famous, as she is about most things. The reason I wrote about her was, well, the various. She was the only one of those women who has not written her own book. So I wasn't going to try and tell Lorraine's story or Anne's story, because they told that for themselves. Alison hadn't. So that was one major reason. Another was that I've known her pretty well. We were on the same New Zealand team together in 1977. And seen her often over the years, and we've hosted each other in our houses, and she and Alan have had Catherine and me to stay there. Always been not a close friend, but a good friend. And so I know her, and I wrote about her when she was back in New York as a guest, and I wrote then about her, interviewed her about when she won New York, and so got a lot of good detail. And then, of course, I know a lot of the people that she ran with while she was in America, and got material from them. So that was another reason. And the other reason was that chapter was the last that I wrote, and I was kind of thinking it doesn't end very well. It just needs a different kind of ending for some reason. And then I realized that if I wrote about Alison, I could present her as the modern Atalanta, and the first chapter in the book is Atalanta, and that would give a beautiful shaping to the book with Atalanta opening and closing it. And that would also help, and you were talking about sexism, that would also help to redress the balance. Because it's very hard when you're writing a book on the history of running or the great stories of running, it's very hard to get an equal balance between the genders for obvious reasons. Men have been running for 3,000 years. Women have only been running for barely 50. So you just don't have the same body of literature and stories and legend. And I just wanted to redress that. So it's now, whatever it is, 7-4, I think, in the book, which is quite pleasing by finishing it with Alison. So that was the other reason. And she is quite an Atalanta. And then it raised that issue of, and the sexist presentation of women, and how that day, you may have been in Auckland, I don't know, but the Sunday after she won the New York Marathon, one of the Auckland papers, Sunday papers, which normally ran a topless bathing beauty on page 3, had a woman editor at that time, and she ran a picture of Alison Rowe running the New York City Marathon, and she described it as a blow for feminism. And it's actually a wonderful moment because, as I say, that presentation of women topless is always entirely static and passive, and that had always been their traditional role. And no doubt when those women stood up, they would have skipped daintily. But that that was the stereotype. And Alison was, Alison in full movement is one of the most beautiful things you'll ever see. But it's power as well as beauty. I mean, it's grace, but there's also huge power there, and you wouldn't want to get in her way. I mean, it'd be like a truck taking you out. But at the same time, she is utterly feminine and utterly beautiful. And that took me back to Atalanta, whose very name means balanced. The name Atalanta means a balance, and so therefore balance between male and female attributes and strengths. Beautiful but strong, fast, good hunter, gorgeous and in all those ways, but most gorgeous in movement, which is Alison's. And so I was trying to describe that, and I hope I won't be accused of sexism, because it's the very reverse that I was trying to achieve.
Absolutely, I think that comes through very strongly. And it was just a wonderful reminder of what a trailblazer she was, and as you say, speaking to that power and dominance that she was able to exert in her running, through her running.
Yeah, and then a personality which is not an aggressive or competitive one, and get in a race, and she's capable of being extremely competitive and extremely astute. But then the rest of her life, she's not like that at all. She's a sweet personality. What you might call a sunny personality. And so again, it was a nice way to finish a book which I was hoping to make mostly positive, because it's a sport that I love, and so I was trying to kind of do the sport a service by telling these stories well and getting them right.
If there's one theme that does come through very strongly in the book, it's the importance of pacing. And I was struck by how many times do us runners have to learn that lesson?
Well, yes. Over and over. And of course, it's a subject that, as a runner and a coach, I'm particularly strong on, because I had to get it right. I had to get the pacing right, because I've got no natural speed at all. I was born without any fast twitch fibers, and I can't sprint at the finish. Geordie Beamish, I just wrote to some American friends today. They were talking about Geordie Beamish, and I said, oh, well, all us, as you know from my running, all us Kiwis have fast finishes like that. But I absolutely, pathetically, hopelessly don't. And so the only way I could succeed in running was by getting the pace right. And over again, as you see, you found people had no idea what a marathon was. And those early marathons, 1896, Spiridon Lewis won that because he was the guy who jogged back and forth to Athens every day alongside his donkey carrying water. And so he knew, just if you keep on jogging, you'll get there. And all the Americans and the Brits and the French all went out like maniacs. And the same thing happened when you look at the splits from 1908. They were crazy. They went through the 10 miles in 5-minute mile speed. Eliud Kipchoge can do that, but you couldn't. Nobody could do it in 1908. Not on those roads, not in those shoes, not on their lack of training. And so Johnny Hayes, who came plugging through and was somewhere almost at the back, he came through and quite deservedly won it. Yes, you're right. It's over and over, and that's partly me. I'm very boring as a coach. I just say, don't go out too fast. Don't go out too fast.
Well, we all know that, and yet so many of us don't follow it. And I can excuse those early marathon runners because they probably didn't know better, but we surely do now. And I'll put my hand up and say I've run races where I've got to the end and gone, oh, what have I done this for? This is crazy pace. But anyway, now look, you were being a little modest there about your own successes and triumphs, and of course, since we've spoken to you, you've become a world champion as well.
Oh well, that was nice. Yes, and in a way, a total surprise to be able to do it on a very tough cross country course. And when I realised how rugged the course was, with some really steep up and down hills. This is in Australia, Bathurst, Australia, and they had made a real cross country course. course. They created some bits, they imported mud, or they imported hoses to make one stretch an absolute quagmire of about 50 meters. And they had some Aussie jokes. They had something they called Bondi Beach, which was deep sand. And they had imitation sharks, at the side. So there were a few nice Aussie jokes about it. So somebody running on 2 knee replacements, I had absolutely no business being able to run well on that course. But I'd been focused on it for a while and saw it as an opportunity, being in Australia, and the timing was right for me. And I could get to Australia, and it wasn't a huge field, but some of the top Spaniards and Mexicans were not there. But you can only race the people who show up. That's all. And it was a world championship, and I did run well. I was really pleased with it, and it was a nice way. If I'd had any sense, I'd have said, okay, that's it, and retired on the spot. but I don't have that kind of sense. But it was a very pleasing thing to do at this stage. I'd won the World Cross Country age group before at 40 and at 50. But then there'd been all the knees and everything else, and I never thought I would do it again. And so to do it again at 80 or 83 was very pleasing. Was a nice thing to look back on, a nice thing to have done.
Absolutely. Dare I ask, what's happening with running at the moment for you?
Yet another comeback from two. I knew when I was running that race in Bathurst, that was in February 2023. I knew that an MRI had found a bit of an issue on one lung. And I was probably going to have lung surgery, which I did. I had one lung lobe removed because it was an incipient cancer that was in there. And so I'm now operating on 4/5 of the full quota of lungs, and that's a bit of a disadvantage.
In an aerobic sport.
In running, yes, exactly. And the only way I can describe it is it's like running at altitude all the time. So it's that same sort of effect. And then I was getting back to some sort of form. In the middle of last year, we were over in America. Before the surgery, I'd been running, say, 25 for 5K. And then after the surgery, it was like 31. But then I got it back down to 27 something in a race in Washington, D.C. But in that one, I tweaked an Achilles tendon. And 2 days later, doing a much more dangerous occupation than running, which is gardening. And I recommend everybody to stay clear of it. It's lethal. But I tripped over a little stump and totally ruptured the Achilles tendon. And it is totally parted. I don't have one on that side now. But another story, too long to tell now. But yesterday I got back up, having started by running 10 paces and then running 1 minute and then running 2 minutes. Yesterday I ran 1 hour.
Wow.
And it's still not anything like previous pace. And I don't know whether I'll ever be able to run previous pace, but it is fascinating the way the body will compensate. If you make it, if you work it, and I'm doing exercise, I'm doing all these endless calf raises or toe raises and wall squats and all of those things. These physiotherapists are really nasty people, aren't they? They put you all through. They give you rubber bands. These rubber bands you have to do things with.
They're worse than journalists, I tell you. But
they are. That's true. Yeah.
What I'm intrigued. What keeps you going? Why don't you just, after that cross-country race and that victory, think, oh, well, I've had a good run. I'll rest on my laurels. Why is it that you're still doing exercises and so determined to get back and keep running?
I just like it. I like the sense of being able to run well, rather than just jog around. I could just walk, and that is right now, that's a serious possibility that if I can't get any kind of pace back, I'll just think, okay, well, I'll just become a walker. But there's still something about the process of getting fit and beginning to run well that just still intrigues me. It's completely irrational, and it's absolute senile fantasy. I'm well aware of that. but it's hard to define exactly why, Eugene. It's certainly not ambition or sense of things unfulfilled, because I've done all that I could possibly hope to do with my basic equipment, and now I'm, it's embarrassing talking to people now, because 2 knee replacements, only half a lung and no Achilles tendon. It's it's like trying to push an old wreck along the road. But I find it very hard to give a good answer to that question. It's just still at some level, it's not exactly enjoyment of the hard work, because that is still hard, but it's an enjoyment of the way I feel when I've done the hard work, and the way the rest of my life feels, the way I feel I can function better and do more. And also just that sense of purpose. And one of the great things about running is that wherever you are, if you do the work, you will improve. And I am improving again now. And at 84, there aren't many things that you're improving at. And even though I've had to drop right down in order to improve, if you see what I mean, but that's true, and I accept that. And so it's a kind of phony improvement, because I'll never actually get back to where I was in the middle of 2023. But it still has that fascination, and I could stop any time and just walk, and no doubt something will finally floor me. But there's a slightly perverse streak in there somewhere.
Yeah, it's feels like a part of me, and when I can't run, I just feel like there's a part of me missing, which I know could sound obsessive or I don't know, crazy, but it is hard to explain. It's just, I run because I run. I don't know.
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely right. It's somebody the other day used the word addictive, and it's not quite an addiction. I could not do it, but it's an ongoing pleasure. And I saw a medical specialist the other day, and he said, "Are you on any medications?" And I said, "Only running." And that's true. I'm on no medications at all, and I really believe that the fact that I'm still functioning physically and mentally at 84 is to a great extent due to the regular hard running, and it is best if it's hard. It's most effective. The research is showing that it's. The other thing, Eugene, it's a bit like doing some of that research for the book. You get kind of fascinated in the end of the story. And I've always loved stories, and I was a specialist in the novel as a literary scholar. And you don't quite know how it's going to end, and I don't want it to end just yet. The story, and even though this story is kind of trickling downhill, and it may end in complete anticlimax, I'm still intrigued to see what's going to happen next. And of course, I'm writing about it. I'm part of an email group based mostly in America, though there are people in the UK and Australia as well, of serious over 80 runners. And we're exchanging ideas all the time. And we're all hooked on this same thing of not, we all know that our best days are behind us, and that whatever we can do is only going to be the best at old age. But we're still all intrigued by seeing what we can do, what is possible. And look at the big picture, we are a generation, my generation of 70 and 80-year-olds now, are redefining aging. And there's another book in that. I mean, obviously, I'm going to write about that sometime. And so I'm interested to see just how far my own body can keep going. So trying to answer it. It's fascinating.
It is. I'm picking a lot, many more chapters and maybe some plot twists. Look, I did want to talk about the Roger Robinson Scholarship for Student Runners. Do you mind telling us a bit about that and what its aims are?
It arose really. The story goes back to the death of my friend Brian Taylor in the Christchurch earthquake. And he was a runner and coach. And a group of us, including his wife and 3 or 4 of his close friends, decided to establish a Brian Taylor Memorial Trust and create a scholarship, because Brian had very strong views. He was a man who had vehement views. He had very strong views against New Zealand's young runners going off to America, and often staying there and being lost to us, or getting messed up by American coaches and so on. I don't have quite such extreme views, but we created that scholarship, and it was open to students all over New Zealand, and it ran very successfully for 10 years, I think, 10 years or more. And then finally we were running out of money from the original contributions, and there wasn't much coming in by way of interest at that stage. You're only getting barely 1% interest from the bank. And so we closed down that scholarship. And then I thought, I still actually believe in this, and I still believe in trying to give our young runners opportunity, not just to stay in New Zealand, but to combine their academic work with their running, and not have to go off and serve beer or be waiters or all the other jobs that they often have to do. 2 things is as much as you can do well. You can't do 3. So talking with the foundation at Victoria University, and they were trying to develop all kinds of things. And I'm not extremely rich or anything like that, but I could afford to put in enough to get the scholarship started. Some other people put some money in, and then I've left money in my will. How long a gap that will be before that kicks in, I don't know. But I do like saying that one of the advantages of it, having done it now, there's not the Roger Robinson Memorial Scholarship, is that I can actually get to know these young runners and take an interest in them. And one of them is James Preston, who ran in Glasgow last week. And there have been about 5 now, I think. 2 of the women are now in America, in American universities. So it's nice being able to meet them and encourage them and see them improve. This year's one is actually at Victoria, is a member of the Victoria University Athletic Club, as well as being at Victoria University. And this scholarship is only for Victoria University. I felt I kind of owed it to my own university, which did look after me pretty well and tolerated my eccentricities. so I am somewhat indebted to Victoria University. I did good work for them, took a lot of responsible jobs, but they tolerated the fact that I would go off to Boston and New York and places like that from time to time. and we managed to work that out.
And represent them at Boston and so on, and even adopt their name. Wasn't there a Go Victoria moment when you was it Heartbreak Hill once?
No, that was it. Yes, that was in Boston. That was a nice moment. The Vice Chancellor, who was a very genial man at that time, Sir Ian Axford, he said, yes, you can. I was dean at that time, and I was going to have to miss a dean's meeting. He said, well, you can go to Boston if you wear the university singlet. So I wore it, which said Victoria University. And this character leant out from the crowd, just coming back towards the finish in Boston. And he said, go Victoria, foist woman. So now we're on gender equality. In those days, I had a beard like yours.
I love that story. I've told it so many times.
It is a good one. But the other one, another year in Boston in 1996, I think it was I was running through pretty well, and somebody leaned out from the crowd and said, "Where's Alison?" Almost indignantly, because he'd only come to see Alison Rowe run. And she was having a bad one and hadn't appeared yet.
Oh dear. Look, I've taken up a lot of your time. I really, really appreciate it. We haven't got to quite enough mischief. I apologise for that as well as being a journalist. But look, we usually ask for a greatest run ever from our guests. But since you've already been on, we wanted to ask you something slightly different. And I'm putting you on the spot here. But what's the greatest running book ever? Now, you can be modest and not nominate another author if you wish, but we really don't mind if you pick one of your own.
No, mine go very close. Seriously, as a literary scholar, and I am very fair-minded on this, I would say I'm probably the second best writer in running. And the absolute best was Kenny Moore, the American writer, and who he also finished 4th in the Olympic marathon. And his book, Bowerman and the Men of Oregon, is an absolute. It's as good as The Boys in the Boat. It's a major piece of biography. It's inside running. It's a better history of Nike than Phil Knight himself wrote. He wouldn't want me to hear me say that, but it's a fabulous book. And so, yes, if you want to know the greatest book, I mean, Roger Bannister's book is pretty well up there. Certainly, my last 2 When Running Made History, and this one would be way up there. But Kenny Moore, I would, you know when you're beaten in a race, you run well, and he never writes a bad sentence. His research is fabulous. There's a wonderful flow and insight and pleasure in the sheer prose, witty and versatile, and all of those things that I would also try and aspire to. So yeah, Kenny Moore.
I'm just looking over at my bookshelf because I've got it, but I'm not sure if it's on the bookshelf here or upstairs. I think it's upstairs actually. The one that
Bill Bowerman was the American coach at the University of Oregon, coach of Prefontaine and all the others. And he was the one who came to New Zealand. This is part of the story. He came to New Zealand, met Arthur Lydiard, and Arthur at that point was just into developing his program for the former heart attack victims and getting them jogging. It was when Arthur was moving his emphasis from training elites into training joggers. Bill Bowerman picked up all that stuff, and he went back, and he and Ken Cooper, basically, the doctor, created the whole jogging movement in America. And so Bowerman is a very important part of the story of running. He was also one of the founders of Nike, so hugely important, and a very formidable and rather quirky coach. I don't like everything that I read about him, but Moore's book is brilliant.
It is. I very much enjoyed that. I used to work with Kenny Moore's brother, Bob Moore. He was a sub at the New Zealand Herald for many years, and in the mid
an American.
Yeah, Bob Moore. Yeah, he was Kenny's brother.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so Bob and I worked together at the Herald, and then in the mid 90s, I was in Hawaii, and I thought, well, I'm in Hawaii. It was the time of the Ironman. I'm going to watch the Ironman. So I went and watched the Ironman on the Big Island, and I got up to run down to the start. I was staying about 10 kilometers from the start, so I thought I'll run down there. And I was running along, and I just happened to bump into another runner, and we got running along, talking together. And he obviously looked at me and said, where are you from, sort of thing. And we got chatting. And I said, where are you from? And he said, I'm from Eugene. Oh, that's funny. It's my name. And I said, funnily enough, I've got a friend at work who is from, grew up there. Oh, really? What's his name? He lived next door to the Moores. I was like, how weird was that I happened to be in America. I happened to be there. I happened to be running at that time, happened to bump into that guy. It was just... Yeah.
Well, I've got a great story, which in a way would wrap up the whole theme of gender in tonight's discussion. And it's also Kenny Moore. Kenny and I were at a book-selling booth at an expo, and with Catherine, and a group of women came to see Catherine, and she went out to the front of the booth and stood there, and there was this ring of women around her, all looking at her absolutely adoringly. And Kenny, who had a very low kind of creaky voice, right, almost a mumbly voice, he just quietly said to me, "It's just like Lourdes." the kind of adoration that male writers never get somehow. I can't understand why.
Well, thank you so much for another terrific conversation. We look forward to the next one. I'm sure, for the next book, which you've hinted at a few times. But look, thank you so much, and all the best, Catherine.
It's a great podcast, and thank you, and keep up the good work.
Roger, what a pleasure. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for putting you through a lot of technical problems trying to get us on a call together, but we got there in the end. We made it, and it was well worthwhile. Thank you so much, as always. Keep running. We hope you enjoyed it. Everyone else, thank you very much for tuning in. We're on social media at Dirt Church Radio. You can email us dirtchurchradio@gmail.com. And then I'm going to hand it back to Matt.
So now don't forget to sign up to the new podcast and the newsletter. Don't forget to write in with your greatest run ever. We'd love to hear from you, and you can read them on the websites too.
Thank you to our sponsors, Scott Running, Further Faster, Currans, and our Substack subscribers, the DCR Aid Station crew. Stay tuned in for our show. We are all over each other today. We're in each other's spaces, but stay tuned for our show in 2 weeks when we have another great guest lined up. Check out our DCR Aid Station next week.
Matewa.
Thanks, Rigby.